we're going to start out with a dynamite panel. I'm sure you can tell it's a dynamite panel by just looking at the personalities sitting up here in the front of the room. I'm going to introduce Kirsten Schwind, who is the program director for Bay Localize, who's going to be the moderator of our start-off panel, and she will, take care of introducing the other folks on the panel and moderating it. After this panel, we're going to have a short break, just everybody to stretch and exercise their vocal cords a little bit more, and then we'll come back and have another session on some of the dynamic work that's been going on in the Bay Area, and so on and so forth. So again, thank you very much, and let me turn it over to Kirsten to get the ball really rolling.
Thanks, Al. I want to recognize Al for his hard work coordinating the Local Clean Energy Alliance and for leading the organizing on this conference. You may not know this, but Al Weinrub gives his time, his energy, and his many years of organizing experience to the Alliance as a volunteer, and he is one of the hardest working and most dedicated people I know. So thank you.
You just got to know that energy comes from everybody.
So I'm Kirsten Schwind. I'm co-founder and program director at Bay Localize, and co-founder of the Local Clean Energy Alliance, which put together about 5 years ago, originally with the Sierra Club and the Pacific Environment, and it's now grown to Northern California's largest clean energy grassroots advocacy alliance with 90 organizational members, many of whom are here in this room. So thank you. It's an organization of many grassroots groups, independent businesses, government agencies that really care about our region, care about our future, and have united in a vision of running our region off a mix as close as possible to 100% renewable energy. Because now is the time for bold action. Because we know that business as usual is not getting us there. Government as usual is not getting us there. But there are many good government initiatives, which we'll be talking about today. And actually thinking as usual is not getting us there. So it's time for big, bold, new thinking. And in fact, let's practice that a little bit. This side of the room, when I say bolder, and when I point at you, you're going to say bolder. And this side of the room, when I point at you, you're going to say faster. So we need is bolder, faster. So let's try this. All right.
Bolder, faster, bolder, faster, bolder, faster, bolder, faster, bolder, faster, bolder, faster.
All right, there we go. All right. And the reason we need bolder and faster is because there is so much at stake. Last fall, Bay Localize organized a regional convening on resilience and equity, and we explored some of the ways in which climate change has a disproportionate impact on vulnerable communities around the world and also in the Bay Area. For example, the impacts of climate change are now increasing food prices, or contributing to an increase in food prices as much as 10% a year. If you're a family that's already struggling with foreclosure, unemployment, or medical bills, that's a huge impact in terms of being able to put healthy food on the table. And 1/3 of Bay Area households are already food insecure, and this is in a relatively wealthy region. It's not like the money isn't out there, though. As early as perhaps this fall, the state of California will be bringing in billions of dollars of income from cap and trade auctions. I'm ambivalent about cap and trade, but it's happening. There's going to be billions of dollars on the table. Where is it going to go? Is it going to go to the most vulnerable communities? There's actually, the California Air Resources Board is holding hearings in Sacramento on May 24th and June 28th on this topic. And we have to be organizing around making sure that those who are most impacted are getting that money, because social justice is not just a side project for energy, it's the main project. And our opening panel this morning is all about the impacts of climate change and energy policy on communities, on workers, on youth, and where we live. So I'm really honored to introduce our panelists this morning, and I will introduce them as in the order that we'll be speaking. So we'll start with Alysse Heartwell. I'm very pleased to introduce. She's a long-standing advocate for local sustainability And she's actually a co-founder of Bay Localize as well, and served on our steering committee. She's currently an online campaigner for 350.org. That's the powerhouse global climate change advocacy organization that's run mostly by youth. And she is passionate about sustainable food and farming. She coordinated the Buy Fresh, Buy Local campaigns with the Community Alliance with family farmers. She spends her weekends digging in the dirt at San Francisco's Alamany Farm. And she is an online campaigner for 350.org. It's a job description that didn't exist 15 years ago. And she builds a grassroots climate movement. And she holds a BA in International Relations from Brown and studied international environmental issues. Thank you, Alysse.
Let me just set up my slideshow. I wasn't sure I was going to go right immediately. Do I do that? It's actually, it's minimized, and if you just open the Internet Explorer tab, it should
Maybe I'll give you a preview of our speakers coming after Alysse.
Sorry about that.
No problem, yeah. After Alysse, we'll have Teresa Almaguer, and who is an organizer with People Organized to Demand Environmental and Economic Rights, PODER, which is a social justice organization in San Francisco. And I'll do the full introduction from Teresa, and we have her up. And after that, we'll have Alysse Maldonado, who is Executive Director of the North Bay Labor Council, AFL-CIO, with a very impressive background I'll be telling you about as soon as well.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This one's better. Excellent. So I'm very pleased to be here. In the program, it does say that Jamie Henn was going to be joining me, and Jamie regrets that he can't be here today. But I am super happy to be here. As Kirsten said, I used to work with Bay Localize, and I really feel like I've come full circle. So going from focusing on really hyper-local organizing here in the Bay Area to now working mostly online and with an explicitly global focus. So for those of you who don't know sort of the history of 350.org, we were founded in about 2007 with some work done prior to that by Bill McKibben and a group of his students at Middlebury College. And since then, it's been largely a youth-driven movement, and we've done several global days of action since 2007, which for all of those days of action, we had actions on every continent. So really trying to build that global movement. And I'm here today to really sort of add that global perspective, I think, on this panel. And I'm going to talk both about that sort of global frame and also a little bit on that local perspective. When we think about this local-global tension, we often think about global problems and local solutions. That's what the bumper stickers have been telling us for years, right? I think the localization movement in general, community-owned power in particular, and my colleagues up here on the panel are going to actually turn that around a little bit and talk about how it's both local solutions and local issues that we're addressing. So I'm the sort of global perspective as well. So without putting us in an entirely different direction, I just want to outline that global problem. And please bear with me, because I know a lot of people here know that climate change is an issue and why it's an issue. But starting with 350.org's name, does anyone know what that number represents? Know it all, again. So 350, it's kind of a wonky name, right? Why would you name your organization this random number? Well, we really felt that 350 is the sort of safe, it's the safe number of carbon in parts per million of the atmosphere. And if that's what we need, then that's what we should be asking for. So let's put that number out there first and foremost. For much of human history, the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere was 275. About 200 years ago, we started increasing that dramatically when we learned how to burn fossil fuels. Now it's 392. We need to be at 350. That's a big gap, and that's a big problem. So we know the outlines of that large problem, right? What we don't maybe see as clearly, and this is maybe part of why it's so hard to address, is the human face of that problem. What the impacts of climate change are really going to mean for people. What they mean already. This is part of why 350 started a project called Connect the Dots. To launch the project, we named last Saturday, so this is very recent, Climate Impacts Day. And we called on people around the world to document impacts in their own communities. We had over 1,000 actions and projects around the world on every continent, and the pictures that you're looking at right now are some of the many thousands that we received. Showing you these photos is the main thing that I wanted to do today, really putting that human face on climate change and making sure we connect the dots. We got photos from islands in the South Pacific. We got photos from deserts in Africa. We got one amazing photo from a tar sands worker in Canada who risked his job to take the photograph. We got photos from teenagers in Micronesia and school children in Sweden. Everyone is feeling the impacts of climate change already. And one reason we need to keep this global frame simultaneously in our minds, even as we work hard on these local problems and local solutions, is that we can't all, as communities, fight this alone. There are many communities out there in the world who can't afford, just can't, to focus on local resilience. For example, just a couple months ago, the island nation of Kiribati entered into negotiations with Fiji to buy land and relocate their nation entirely. Can a community survive that sort of dislocation? Can a culture? I guess we're going to see, because they are the first climate refugees, but they are not going to be the only ones. So there's a great William Gibson quote. He's a sci-fi author that I love, and it says, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." And that's what we're seeing in some of these images today. From all over the world. Because the other reason that we need to keep this global frame in mind, not just the moral reason, not just sort of the rejection of this idea of lifeboat ethics, that we can let some people to their fate, but also because these people are us in a very practical way. The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. We may be feeling, the impacts of climate change that we're feeling in the US are tangible, right? We're feeling those billion-dollar plus storms. We're feeling those economic impacts. We're feeling the rising price of food. But in, say, 30 years, we'll also be feeling the sea level rise that is already such a huge problem for those teenagers in Micronesia. Projected sea level rise by 2030 during a storm surge at high tide could be as much as 4 feet. That's here in the US. That's where we are now. And that's a blink of an eye. In 100 years, Oakland could be underwater. Again, we may not be alive, the people here in this room, but from a planning perspective, 100 years, I got a laugh out of Aaron for that, for some reason. But from a planning perspective, 100 years is nothing. And we know that Oakland can't afford to build dikes. This is why we're doing this today as well. So that's a bit about what's at stake. Sorry to start this out on such a downer. We are going to have to do an energy builder later. But some people, one thing that we get a lot at 350, because we are really an upbeat group, despite my presentation and these pictures. One thing we get a lot is the feedback, well, isn't it too late to do anything? And what I would say to that, and what 350 says to that, as primarily a youth-driven movement and organization, is that we, as the younger generations, can't afford to think that way. We simply can't. We don't have that option. We don't have the option to throw up our hands. But I'd also say to that we really are building a movement, that things feel possible that didn't feel possible 2 years ago. And you can feel, as well as it being really sobering to look at these pictures, it's also really inspiring because people are really all over the world connecting the dots. And this is actually a very important time and a tipping point, perhaps. So you can feel that movement building, and it's inspiring. Distributed community-owned renewable energy is important to that not only because it is more likely to get the job done, and I think we will be talking about that in much more detail later today, but also because it lets us start right now, which is what we need to be doing.
Thanks, Alysse. And next up we have Teresa Almaguer, who is an organizer with People Organized to Demand Environmental and Economic Rights, Poder. She's a Chicana born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area with family roots in Mexico. She began organizing in the 1990s as a high school student for immigrant rights and ethnic studies implementation in high schools. She has been with Poder for over 10 years, coordinating the Youth Leadership Development Program, working with San Francisco youth to develop their organizing skills and leading campaigns for economic and environmental justice in the southeast neighborhoods of the city. Please welcome Teresa.
So hi everybody, my name is, well everybody calls me Tere, but my official name is Teresa. But I just want to thank you for having me here. I'm a little nervous, and I think that, that stems a little bit from just renewable energy being kind of like a topic that's disassociated from people, from community, like 350 parts per million, like that's all like stuff that is a little bit hard for community to relate to. And I think one of the reasons I love working with Poder is because we really figure out how to translate that into terms we understand, into experiences we live, into knowledge that we have. And so I come representing Poder, which is People Organizing to Demand Environmental and Economic Rights, long acronym. But two keywords are environmental and economic, right? Those are two keywords that, that our community knows and feels. And we began in the mission in the early 1990s, really organizing around lead contamination, because the majority of Latinos lived in the mission. A lot of kids were getting lead poisoning, and it was affecting their learning development. And then we started doing more toxic mapping, right? So like there's brownfields in our neighborhoods, there's Superfund sites, like what does that mean? How is that connected to my asthma, this cancer that my aunt got, or whatever? And then we went towards, we need to build parks. We have less than 1% of the parks in the city and one of the highest number of kids, right? So then we worked towards building a park on 23rd and Folsom that now is in great use every day. And then, of course, with our organizing efforts and our community building, property prices went up. There's a park instead of an empty lot with a bunch of junk in it. And so what happens, right? So everybody wants to move into our neighborhood. It's the sunniest neighborhood in the city. And so we start getting a lot of displacement, or what people call gentrification, right? And so, so I know the day that the park opened, like 3 of the families across the street that had worked to get the park open got displaced, right? And so then we started working towards displacement, right? And like, like we need to figure out how to like stop our families or protect our families, right? From being displaced from the neighborhood that they've invested so much in, that our community orgs have invested so much in. I'm one of those youth that community organizations invested time, money, love, skills, and that's why I'm here today. And so how do we keep the vibrancy, the culture, the love of our community, and all that we've invested within that, right? And then we moved into like, it's in community planning, right? It's in zoning. How do we zone things so that we have protections, and not all decisions are being made in the hands of the planners. Not all decisions are being made in City Hall somewhere, and with folks that never even step foot in our neighborhoods, but are catering to the needs of people making a lot of profits, right, off of the land in our neighborhood that we've worked to create for so long. And so from there, right, we realized, we need money, right? We need money to buy land to create sustainability in our neighborhoods, right? So then that leads me to this, sowing seeds, growing justice, restoring community, right? And really figuring out how Poder members and how our community is building a new economy now. Everybody remembers the crash, the stock market crash, and right? I mean, I know a lot of nonprofits were shaking, a lot of nonprofits didn't make it, a lot of our community folks, a lot of our families lost their jobs. We were at the bottom of the job barrel, and it was really hard, right? So when that happened, we decided that we needed to bring the economy back to our neighborhoods, right? We needed to figure out, like, how do we create structures so that we're not going to be, we're going to be surviving, because we're survivors, right? And so from that, we had strategy sessions, or what are they called? Sessions in which we worked with our members and trying to figure out, well, we're doing it already. We're already surviving, so how are we doing this? How are we valuing the talents and the skills of everybody in our community so that we're thriving, so that we're building that economy back within our neighborhoods in a time when there isn't really job growth, people are getting laid off, there's no investment in youth, education systems have no investment from public entities, there's no jobs for kids, for youth. And so from that we developed this 4-point system to really look at how we reject the myth that our economy can rebound without deliberate action. So what are those deliberate actions that we need to take? How are we developing our leadership development as staff, as members, as to make those deliberate actions and to transform our neighborhoods so that that economy is back in our hands? And so our first myth to debunk was, something that we hear a lot is maximize production and profits and workers and the planet be damned, right? That's pretty much what capitalism says. So what we're saying is restore health and home, honor work and land, right? Those are the things that we need to be pushing forward. Those are the policies that we need to be at the forefront of fighting for, right? And so how do we not just commodify energy? How do we not just make green something that's profitable? How can we create alternatives to power our communities and be part of the solution? And minimize environmental impact, right? And really looking at how a lot of investment needs to be made in low-income communities of color, because this thing called environmental racism exists. Our communities have been burdened with a disproportionate amount of sewage, power plants, garbage dumps, like I said, brownfield, Superfund sites for decades, right? And those are all been things that the government has deliberately put in our neighborhoods, and that has caused disproportionate amount of disease, right? Like heart disease, cancer, asthma, learning difficulties for our children. So as the communities that are most affected by these burdens of a fossil fuel economy, what are ways in which we could create community deep retrofits to make low-income housing more habitable? And at the same time providing union jobs so that youth in their own neighborhoods could green their neighborhoods, could create fortifying infrastructures of neighborhoods that will strengthen our community assets, right? And so really looking at how environmental justice has always made a connection between economy, environment, and community health and sustainability. And just to quote one of our members from one of the focus groups, she said, "It's not enough to have a green job that simply take care of an environment. If we turn our backs on the needs of the survival of our people, we need to start with all of us." So really looking at kind of like the histories and her stories of how our community has been affected, and looking towards really remedying that and creating economic opportunity that could help us remedy it ourselves, right? Our second point is debunking the myth that, the market's going to save us. I don't know when the market has ever saved anybody, but maybe put more money in the pockets of corporations. But what we're saying is we need to make the government serve us, right? How can we get our tax dollars to serve our community needs and not corporations? Create jobs in our neighborhoods and not just write off monies that could go into our education system that corporations should pay. So the government has never given us anything easily, right? In the environmental justice movement, if there's been power plants that have been taken out of communities, if there's been any kind of remediations in neighborhoods, it's because communities have organized and fought hard and long, 10 years, 20 years, for the government to be held accountable for that, right? And so I think it's really important that we hold our government officials accountable, that we hold our government structures accountable, and that people are at the forefront of really making sure that our tax monies are being invested in us, right? And not just in corporations. And so I think it's really important to spearhead efforts that establish, like within San Francisco, city funds and support local campaigns that create local jobs through public investments, upholding workplace rights, invest resources for cooperative and micro enterprise development, and provide training and careers that strengthen and rebuild our communities. Our next point is, in our 4-point system is debunking the myth that, private developers run the city and line their pockets, right? And what we say, oh no, that's what happens. And what we say is, put the people in charge of planning their own communities, right? And that's a very important principle within environmental justice, is we speak for ourselves, right? We speak for ourselves, and nobody knows our neighborhoods and our communities better than us. We walk through there every day, we live there, we go to school there, we play there, we pray there, right? And so it's really about investing in people and giving them the opportunity to use that knowledge to develop their own neighborhoods. So how do we support this vision, right? And so Poder has been leading efforts to reclaim publicly owned land in our neighborhoods and transform concrete lots into affordable housing, which is greatly needed in the city, and sites for community programs and open spaces. So we have been able to plant seeds within the leadership of our community and our neighbors to envision a place where we're able to reclaim those lands and to see it to fruition, right? We've built one park, we're in the process of building another park, and then we're in the process of figuring out how to build 2 more affordable housing sites, because I'm from the city, and if you live in the city, it's just ridiculous, right? I mean, really, San Francisco is becoming a place that's kicking out, people of color, families, and if you don't make like over $120,000, which is not that many people in the city, then it's really hard to survive. Our last point is, some say bankers and bosses, investors and markets, they make the economy run. And what we say is community-based and worker-run puts the economy back in our hands, right? And so really looking at, community-based and worker-run puts the economy back in our hands. How do we look deep within ourselves to find that knowledge that we all have to create things like sustainability, economic resiliency, EJ? These are not new words. A lot of us only have to go back 1 generation, maybe 2 generations, to some of the old traditions from like our home countries in Mexico or wherever you're from, or even family that maybe wasn't born in the city, and really merge that old traditions and new technologies to create economic communities that have sustainability and economic resiliency. And so one of the things that we look at is looking towards our elders and really figuring out, like, how can we create a better relationship with our elders, in which we're, instead of devaluing the elders in our communities, valuing all the knowledge that they have to create these fancy, trendy, sustainability, economic resiliency words that have always been a part of our communities and have always been a part of our families. And so for myself, I run the youth program, and I just want to give a little example of how leadership development is vital in creating solutions in our neighborhoods. Working with the youth program last year, we did a project in which we actually did exchanges in 2 areas. We went to LA to exchange with Communities for a Better Environment and visit all the refineries in the ports of Wilmington, the Communities for a Better Environment, and really looking at how, there's multiple refineries side by side with schools, with families, and families are suffering. They're suffering from not just the refining of the oil, but then the export of the oil. They have to deal with the constant emissions. They have cancer. Their parents have cancer. And so going there, listening to those stories, building relationships, building family with those youth, and then going to North Dakota, to Big Bear Reservation, and seeing how there's a lot of fracking going on there, and seeing a lot of the indigenous communities have their land taken away that has been a part of their tradition forever, and seeing how a lot of the taking out of the oil from that reservation is causing a lot of deaths in just big semis, killing folks on the road. It was just really hard. People losing connection to their land, not being able to grow food on their land, their water systems being contaminated. And then coming back to San Francisco and working with youth that live side by side of the only two freeways in San Francisco, the 101 and the 280, and having to also deal with like cancer in their families and heart disease and asthma their whole lives, and seeing how that fossil fuel economy at all levels is pretty much destroying our families and our communities' health, and not creating in any way sustainability for Mother Earth, right? So from that political education, the youth created a project in which they wanted to put their part into fighting the fossil fuel economy. And so they joined up with the bike co-op, the bike kitchen in San Francisco, and 15 youth built bikes from scratch. They got the skills to learn how to fix them, they didn't have to pay anything. And then they created a toxic tour of their neighborhood, looking at some of the victories of what we could envision together in creating parks and creating affordable housing, and then looking at the different contamination sites and what we could do to clean those up, what we can do to deal with the 2-block PG&E plant that's like less than a block away from one of the high schools that they go to. And really looking at what is our way and what is our part in figuring out how to together use our talents, our skills, our minds, our hearts, our brains, and making sure that at least our communities are working towards building sustainability and economic resiliency. And so we have Sowing Seeds, Growing Justice, and our youth publication up here. We have a few copies if anyone's interested. And just really asking everybody to think about how we're valuing each other, how we're respecting each other, and how we're really investing in all of us, right? Youth, elders, adults, and really figuring out how to work together to create harmony with the earth, and to create like systems that will benefit all of us, right? All of us, there isn't going to be a disproportionate burden on a certain community like the fossil fuel economy has created. You know, how are we all healthy? How are we all thriving? How do we all have jobs? How do we all have housing stability, right? Because really that's what's going to be able to create longevity for us as humans on this planet. So local solutions, I think, are really the key to cooling down the planet. And just want to thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tere, for that impassioned reminder why it's so important to move away from the fossil fuel economy. It's important for the public communities as well as the planet. Our final speaker on this panel is Lisa Maldonado. She's the Executive Director of the North Bay Labor Council, AFL-CIO, and she directs the coordinated efforts of union locals in Marin, Sonoma, and Mendocino and Lake counties to work collectively on mobilizing workers on legislative and political issue campaigns that affect working families. The North Bay Labor Council has over 70 affiliated unions with 60,000 members, so that's a lot of people. She works for advocating living wages and community impact reports, as well as for card check agreements, project labor agreements, and community benefit agreements that will ensure that local government are accountable to creating sustainable jobs and responsible, green, and equitable policies around development. She's been an activist working for families for 15 years. She's the vice president of the Sonoma County Latino Democratic Club and on the board of the directors of Sonoma chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. She's also recently elected the state Democratic Party delegate from the 7th Assembly District. She's an attorney who previously worked as the field director for the ACLU in Northern California, where she coordinated field campaigns on issues such as racial profiling, the death penalty, marriage equality, and immigrants' rights. She has previously served as a campaign coordinator for the California Faculty Association and as the political director of the San Mateo Labor Council. So thank you so much, Lisa.
Well, I need to update update my resume. Just I actually am here primarily as someone who's worked and is currently working in Sonoma County with Sonoma Clean Energy. And I want to recognize Woody Hastings, who's one of the folks working with us, labor and business and a bunch of other environmental organizations. I'm here to kind of talk about coalition building and how there's kind of I've had two experiences so far working with the environmental community. One in Marin, where Marin Clean Energy started, which wasn't as successful for us as it could have been, and the one that we're currently doing in Sonoma. And that could just be the difference between Sonoma and Marin, but it could also be in terms of organizing, how people organize with labor, any coalition with labor. Anybody here from unions, union movement folks? Yay! I really, when I moved to Sonoma, I'm actually from Redwood City, and I'll tell you briefly, I grew up in Redwood City. My dad was an undocumented, well, I guess that makes me an anchor baby recently. I was thinking about that. My dad was, he came here to the United States when he was very young, 12, with his uncles, to pick strawberries in Watsonville, to pick cotton, I guess in Arizona, to pick other stuff in Texas. And he used to tell me stories about coming across the desert, and that they didn't have it. You know, one of the stories that was very vivid for me was that they didn't have any water, or they had run out of water. They brought what they thought was enough water, but it wasn't. And there they were in the desert, him and his uncles, who were, 17, 19, whatever, young, and they ran out of water, and they began to hallucinate. And the immigration who, came and found them were like their savior. They were so thrilled. Of course, immigration folks were laughing and like, "What are you doing crossing the desert without any water?" But he told me the stories of working in the fields and what that was like for him, and how many times they would work, pick crops. They slept outside, which is why my father never wanted to go camping with us always. "Oh, I slept enough outside." It was, we were in many trips that way. He always insisted on sleeping inside, but. That after they had picked everything, the owner, grower, would call the immigration, and they would all have to get sent back before they got paid. And this was, back in the 50s. He also was a member of the Bracero program, so he came legally and illegally. Actually, he did both ways. And he mentioned once that an immigration officer actually walked up to the door when he was taking away the workers to deport them, and said to the grower, "Pay them their wages first." And he said it was the only time it ever happened, and he was so grateful. But one of the things that brought me into the labor movement, and you could tell I've done a bunch of knee-jerk, kind of progressive, whatever causes. One of the things that brought me into the labor movement was seeing how, when I met my mother. My grandparents were helping, at the time they used to help people get their paper. My grandpa was a cement mason and a union organizer in the cement masons, and he helped my dad get first into the laborers union and then into the Teamsters union, where my dad drove a truck for, the rest of his career, 20, 30 years. And when my dad became a Teamster, we got health care for the first time in my family. I remember I was 8 and we went to Kaiser, and we had benefits. We didn't have to worry if my father was unemployed. And I saw how the union movement and unions in general created a middle class for our family. And I believe strongly that every family deserves that. In one generation, we went from, my father has a 3rd grade education, but we managed to buy a house in California, just barely in time, right? Both my brother and I went to college. I went to law school. My brother's now an organizer with the National Union of Healthcare Workers. But what I learned was the path to the middle class has to include wages, good wages. And so when we hear people talking about green jobs, sustainable jobs, my job and what I think those of us in the labor movement are concerned about is making sure that those are good union jobs, real jobs, careers, path to careers. And in Marin, when we got started working on the issue of Marin Clean Energy, we already had a problem from the get-go, because one of the labor organizations, folks probably know this, that works and work very hard to work with electricity is the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, which is one of the oldest unions in the country. And, you know, we had been, at that time I was on the board of an organization called the New Green Deal. Norman Solomon, who's currently running for Congress, started this group, and you know, marine clean energy, one of the first things we're talking about is community choice aggregation. And Norman was very, I mean, one of the things I love about Norman, he was very, very committed that labor have a place at the table in any green discussion, and that labor be listened to. But even saying that, it was really hard to allow people to bring in some IBEW folks just to talk, because the perception was they were PG&E apologists, and they weren't going to be, you know, okay with clean energy, and to a certain extent they were not okay with marine clean energy, but it wasn't specifically about PG&E. What I want to discuss and maybe kind of hit on a little bit before we go to questions is the right way and kind of the wrong way to work with labor. Because in Sonoma Clean Energy, it was completely different. We had folks like Woody and Hancock from Climate they'd come and talk to us. They sat down with me and Jack Buckhorn, who's the president of our labor council, but is also IBEW 551, and said, we want to do something here in Sonoma, and we want to have it work, and we want you guys to be part of it. And we were very honest that there's always going to be issues. I mean, as much, believe me, I hate PG&E more than anybody. As someone who's only had their energy cut off, right? I can really hate them and have to pay that horrible deposit. But I'm also very aware that PG&E is one of the best employers of middle-class union jobs and workers, you know, that we have. I mean, and that's real. That is something. And I think what happens sometimes in the environmental movement is people kind of forget that, or that piece is not easy to see. And so when you have workers and people who are, you know, very concerned about the attacks on the labor movement, attacks on workers' rights to organize, attacks on pension and retirement, and all the things that our ancestors fought for, died for, the 8-hour day, all these other things going, and there's nothing being replaced with that. It is a very scary loss, and I think people need to be clear on that when they start working with labor, because that's always going to be an issue. Every job is important to labor. And so we really have to emphasize that with people in any kind of alliance, that, you know, it's not enough to say, oh, these are going to be green jobs, or we're going to work with disadvantaged folks, or we're going to, you know, bring in at-risk youth, because that to us sends up, you know, a red flag. If you're going to bring in people of color and use at-risk youth into an apprenticeship training where they can learn a skilled trade, be paid, and have a middle-class job, we are for that and we will help you. But if you're going to pay people $10 an hour, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, to become a solar installer, no, that's not a job. That's not a real job. That's a $10 an hour job that might help some people a little bit, but ultimately you're displacing a skilled electrician. And what we want is people of color to have access to these careers and skill trades. And we can do that if we work together. But for a lot of us, and those of us who've worked in nonprofits, we've also seen this. I mean, I don't, you know, we see this happening at the county level, state level, right? Where all of a sudden, you know, people who work for the county and city, oh, that's too expensive, let's replace it, let's outsource this, and we'll bring in a nonprofit, they'll do it cheaper. Now, I know this may be, you know, bad in a nonprofit kind of area, but I've worked in nonprofits, and I know a lot of the reason that it's cheaper is because one person makes a really good salary at the top, and the rest of us all are barely getting along, and we're supposed to be grateful that we get to do this work, helping people, and something that we care about so much. That's not something that, you know, we're going to get behind. We believe in fair wages, good wages, middle-class wages for people, and we will not supplant those wages with, you know, non-profit wages and no benefits. It has to be equitable. So, I'll give the word to nonprofits, you know what I'm talking about. So I have to also talk just briefly about the whole ethos of environmentalists and labor folks, and it's kind of funny sometimes. When I was on the Green New Deal, it was really an insight into the difference in culture between being with environmentalists and being in labor. And you know, you walk into a room and you see, I mean, these were my people. They all had their little stainless steel, you know, mugs and their 100%, you know, their cotton clothing, God love them. And I was like, you know, I do like these people, but then somebody would get up and start talking, right, about water treatment. And he'd talk to the whole group. This guy was brilliant. It was all good ideas, and he was like, you know, you can do this, and it's all natural, and you're using, you know, again, I don't know exactly it was some kind of biological thing where it was all natural amoebas that treated the water. And then at the end he said, and this was his selling point, and the best thing is you don't need anybody to run it, hardly any workers. And I just went, oh, you lost me, you know. So there was just no consciousness that, yes, environmental concerns are important, but people are part of the environment. And the same thing with housing and housing issues, you know. Low-income housing is becoming a meaningless term in places like Marin and Nevada where, you know, low-income housing, I think you have to make $90,000 and you're eligible for low-income housing in Nevada. Okay? But a way to increase low-income housing is to pay people a decent wage so they can afford to live where they work. You know, which brings us to another issue when we have people talking about green buildings and green construction. A lot of what we see are people have these ideas about green building, but then when they're bringing in the contractor, it's a scab contractor who's making money by exploiting undocumented immigrants, underbidding, and those people are driving because they can't afford to live in Sonoma or Marin. They're driving from Stockton for a couple hours on the road. So how green is that building ultimately, right? So what we need from environmentalists and the way we need to work together and the way I would encourage people whenever you're talking about bringing in labor is we need to be at the table beforehand. In Sonoma, we were very lucky that we had a very good labor enviro group called Accountable Development Coalition that was put together because we were tired of the good old boys in Sonoma running everything. And we realized that if labor and progressives and enviros got together, there was more that we did agree on than we did. Sure, there's some issues like the Water Park Casino. No, we're not going to agree on that, okay? They're going to build a union, project labor agreement, card check, we're for it. According to the strong environmentalists in Sonoma, there's a water shortage. Of course, we believe not on Indian land, they don't have a water shortage. So we actually just finally, after, you know, fight after fight after fight, we said, let's not talk about it. We can't do this one together. Let's move on. And so for the most part, we've managed to come together and make sure that things are built union, that we can get environmentalists helping us get project labor agreements, and that we, when it comes time to take, for us to lobby on those issues and lobby our political leaders, labor can support the environmentalists as well. And so we're really happy to be a member of the Blue-Green Alliance. And to, you know, it's lucky for us. I mean, for a lot of folks down here it might be different, but certainly in Sonoma and Marin, you can't get anything done politically if you do not have the support of the environmental community. Now, that's a good thing, I think. That's a great thing. And I know some people complain it's hard, you can't get anything built. My friends in the operating engineers are a little irritated that they can't lay down as much asphalt as they'd like to. But I think for both of us, it's a real good thing. We're happy, for the most part, to be working with people that want to make the world better, cleaner. And for those of us in energy, please keep in mind, you really need to have the electrical workers. These are people who know how energy works. They've been doing it. They are on a lot, most of them are on the cutting edge, and they train their apprentices on the cutting edge of green technology. You know, you won't always agree with them, but they should be at the table, and you should try to work with them. And your local labor council should be helping you work with them, and sometimes your other labor unions can help you work with them. So I'll leave it at that because I know people probably are tired of being talked to for all this time. But I want to thank you guys for the effort and for the outreach and for the endeavoring to work with working people. Thanks very much. You know, obviously for us in the past, that's been through unions. But a workers' cooperative, you know, certainly, I think that can work. I think the problem is sometimes persuading some of the folks that have, some of the unions that have historically been dependent on, whether it's coal or, you know, to kind of wean people away from that, it can be hard. But I worked at, one of my first jobs was at a a consensus model collective. It was actually a feminist collective, to tell you how long ago that was. Quite a while, but you know, I think that they are amazing. I think they, you know, they definitely, it can work. It's a more difficult sometimes to get things done, but I absolutely feel like that's something that's good. And we actually have had a couple of, there's a few transition towns up in Sonoma, and they've had some, I've been meaning to get to one of the talks on that. There's a lot of kind of people going back and forth and learning about these places. Moderator, right? Is that what you're...
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, this actually would be a union worker cooperative. In other words, the USW. And the UAW is interested in this to a certain extent, too.
That's great. I think that's amazing.
It's not just a workers' cooperative. It's actually a union
workers cooperative.
Right.
I think that's great. I think that's similar to what happened at Republic. I know they had something similar, of all places, in San Francisco at the Lusty Lady. I'm sure some of you have been there and seen that. It's also a workers' collective, but I don't know how well it's doing right now. But I definitely think that's a great idea.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Ibeco. We love you guys for that. And just really talking about how, my dad was a labor union member. My mom was a bakers union member. And I totally think that unions have totally made it possible for me to not have to worry about healthcare while I was growing up, go to school. But I think it's really important for us to stop seeing ourselves as like labor unions and environmentalists or environmental justice organizers. We really need to see ourselves as one community. And we really need to think about the long-term sustainability of our planet and of our communities, And so I think it's really about figuring out like what the models are that are creating justice for all and not just for a few jobs, because I do feel very lucky and blessed that I was born and raised in a union family. But then I also think about all those families at the top of a smokestack right next to the PG&E factory in the Baby Thunders Point that were being polluted constantly for 30 years and whose family members are now living with the repercussions of that pollution. And so how do we come together at a table and really figure out how our community, we are all a part of this community, and at what cost are a few jobs to our health in general, and how do we create jobs, and whether it be through co-ops. I think it's going to have to be in struggle. It's hard. It's not going to be easy, but figuring out ways where we all have access to those things, right? And I don't know if that's like a nationalized healthcare plan. I don't know if that's like, I think in the United States we tend to like segment like, oh, your healthcare, that's your cause. Oh, your environmental justice, that's your cause. Oh, and so really figuring out how all of those things come together. Oh, your labor union, so like figuring out how all those things come together, because that's really the answer so that folks aren't left behind, I want every kid or every youth in California to have the same experience I've had, the same opportunities that have brought me here today to this table, that have invested in me and created my leadership to be able to then pass it on to other youth, So how do we work together and really challenge ourselves to go down that path? And so I just want to thank everybody. I felt so connected to you. My grandfather was a bracero. Like my dad came.
He's still waiting for his money. My dad. I told my dad that the United States was going to give him his money back if there was a lawsuit. He's like, oh yeah, sure.
You know what? My uncles in Mexico gave me all their documentation to
great.
Register, but they haven't seen anything.
Yeah, no.
And unfortunately, my dad and my grandfather have both passed. But we really have to think about all the experiences of our grandparents, great-grandparents, and think about, how are we creating a better world, In which
I just want to say, one thing, sister, I want to tell you that I grew up in Redwood City, like I said, 3 generations of union. I worked for the San Mateo Labor Council, which was pushing very hard on this big project, Cargill, to fill in the bay, the last of the bay out there in Redwood City. I got in such trouble because my mother, of course, went out there and stood up at the public hearing where labor was pushing, we need these jobs, we need these jobs. And she said, we're 3 generations of labor in my house and we oppose this. We think the wetlands should be. I got all these calls the next day, but I have to support my mother because she's right. And the other issue is none of us are either or. Obviously, those of us that are in labor, we love the environment and nobody wants a job at the expense of the rest of the world. And what's more important, though, is that we don't want to create a system where the question is, do you want your job or do you want somebody else's kid to be able to have in the future? Do you want you don't even want to be arguing against your own kids in the future having a good earth to leave it to them. So we need to work on the systems and we need to start from the fact that we all are invested in it and make sure that we act as if that when we bring people along.
And as cheesy as it sounds, it starts with us. I'm proud to say that I work at a nonprofit where our director, and I'm like the youth program coordinator, which I don't know where it falls in our hierarchy. We all get paid the same.
Yay.
We all work, we have benefits. And so, like, I mean, we all are creating these structures. We are the creators of these structures, you know? So how do we break that mold of, in which, of stereotypes, right? Of, like, you know, it was, because that has been something that we've been stuck in and that we need to move forward from, you know? So, and this is work that needs to be done. There's no way around it. We need to create sustainability, or otherwise we're gone, right? So.
Now, I have one more question, and we'll have a brief answer to this one.
So I'm really interested in this kind of unifying concepts. It seems like if we are to restore atmospheric carbon to 350 parts per million, we're going to have to reevaluate the profit motive, whether it be at the shareholders table or the laborers' living wages. So I'm curious to hear from Lisa how the 350 concept resonates with labor, and what do you see as a really unifying theme to bring all these different factions together?
Well, briefly, I will say that I think it has to be the jobs. I mean, there are just as many jobs in creating clean economy, clean energy, right? There are more. So people can be, you know, recalcitrant because we get used to, and in the labor movement, I think we fight so hard and we feel so beleaguered sometimes because it took so much to get these jobs, and there's definitely a feeling like people are attacking. I think, though, that when you have people saying, let's create good, you know, good, well-paying jobs, and those people are willing to come with you to the county, to the city, you know, to wherever you're speaking, and speak up on behalf of those jobs being paid, you know, being, you know, good jobs, that creates a completely different dynamic, you know, because there's a whole scarcity issue, and that it really works on people. For those of us in labor movement, we're seeing so many takebacks now. But, you know, when I started working, everyone had a pension and retirement. I mean, really, if you went to a full-time job, public or private, the only reason you took a full-time job was so that you get benefits. Now it's considered this big, you know, I mean, I've seen up in North County people who were making $27, $28 an hour, making $10 an hour now. Wages have been stagnant for a long time and haven't kept pace with, you know, with. So I think the other thing, and I saw it somewhere in some of these materials, is looking at the difference between paying big dividends to shareholders, right, which is what a lot of these, whether it's for-profit companies end up doing, and spreading that out equally among people who are actually doing the work and creating the structures. So yeah, I think that's the way to go.
I want to very much thank all of our panelists. Thank you, Lisa, Kevin, and